Listen with every particle of your awareness, because what Rudolf Steiner revealed about imagination will overturn everything materialist science has taught you to believe about the relationship between mind and reality, will expose the devastating lie that thoughts are just electrochemical brain activity with no power beyond the skull, will show you that imagination is not mere fantasy or daydreaming, but is actual creative force operating in dimensions invisible to physical senses, force that shapes not just your inner experience, but external reality itself. That what you imagine with sufficient intensity and clarity literally creates forms in the etheric realm that then densify into physical manifestation. That every human creation, from technology to social structures to art, first existed as imagination before taking material form. And that understanding how to wield this force consciously is difference between being passive victim of circumstances and being active creator of your life and world. Steiner's teaching here is not metaphorical or motivational speaking, but is precise spiritual scientific observation of how consciousness actually operates, how imagination functions as bridge between spiritual and physical dimensions, how what appears in your mind's eye as mere subjective vision is actually objective reality and process of becoming, seed of future taking form and present through the magical yet lawful activity of creative imagination. The materialist worldview that dominates modern thinking insists that imagination is epiphenomenon, mere side effect of brain processing, evolutionary accident that produces pleasant fantasies and useful mental rehearsals, but has no reality beyond neurological activity, that the physical world exists independently of consciousness, and that mind can only perceive and react to reality, never create it. But Steiner's clairvoyant investigation revealed the opposite. That consciousness is not produced by matter, but rather matter is condensed consciousness. That what we call physical reality is actually the end result of long process of densification from spiritual dimensions through etheric and astral realms, finally into physical form. That imagination operates at the etheric level where forms are still plastic and responsive to conscious shaping. That skillful use of imagination can intervene in the formative process before it solidifies into fixed physical patterns. That this is how all genuine creation occurs, whether in art, or invention, or healing, or personal transformation, or even in the great cosmic creation that brought universe itself into being. Research that touches this understanding without fully grasping its implications includes studies on placebo effect, showing that belief and expectation produce measurable physiological changes, that imagining healing can trigger actual healing processes, suggesting mind affects matter in ways that mechanistic models cannot explain. Studies on mental rehearsal and motor imagery show that vividly imagining performing an action activates same neural pathways as actually performing it. That athletes who practice through visualization improve nearly as much as those who practice physically, indicating that imagination creates actual changes in nervous system organization. Research on neuroplasticity demonstrates that brain physically restructures itself based on experience, including imagined experience. That what you consistently visualize becomes neurologically real, creates pathways that then influence perception and behavior. Studies on manifestation and goal achievement show that people who clearly visualize desired outcomes while taking aligned action achieve goals more reliably than those who just act without clear vision, suggesting that imagination somehow participates in creating conditions for outcomes to manifest. But Steiner's understanding goes far beyond these psychological and neurological effects into the metaphysical dimension where imagination operates as actual creative force in subtle realms. He taught that human being is not just physical body, but is complex of interpenetrating bodies, physical, etheric, astral, and ego, each operating at different level of density and consciousness. And that imagination is primarily activity of etheric body, the formative force body that organizes and vitalizes physical matter, that gives it shape and life. The etheric body thinks in images rather than abstract concepts, works through pictures and symbols and living forms, rather than through logic and analysis. And when you consciously create clear mental images, you're actually working with the substance of the etheric body itself, shaping etheric forces that then impress themselves on physical matter, creating the formative patterns that physical reality follows. Every physical object was first an imagination, Steiner observed. The chair you're sitting on existed as image in designer's mind before taking physical form. The building you're in was envisioned by architect before being constructed. Every tool, every technology, every artwork, every social institution began as imagination, as vision of something that didn't yet exist in physical world, but which someone saw clearly enough in their mind's eye to bring into manifestation through sustained imaginative activity combined with physical effort. This is obvious for human creations, but Steiner's radical claim is that it's equally true for biological forms, for the shapes of plants and animals and even human bodies, all of which exist first as spiritual archetypes. as divine imaginations held in consciousness of spiritual hierarchies, which then gradually densify through etheric formative activity into the physical forms we perceive with ordinary senses. Understanding imagination as creative force, rather than just mental entertainment, transforms how you relate to your own thinking and visualizing. Every image you hold in consciousness is not inert fantasy, but is active force beginning to shape reality, creating patterns in etheric realm that attract circumstances and opportunities aligned with the image, influencing your own body and energy and behavior in directions that manifest the vision, sending ripples into collective consciousness that can influence others' thinking and choices. This is why Steiner emphasized the enormous responsibility that comes with developing powerful imagination, why he insisted that moral development must accompany imaginative training, because imagination without ethics is black magic, creative power used for selfish purposes, force that can harm as easily as it can heal, and the karma for misusing imaginative power is severe precisely because you're wielding actual creative force, not just having private thoughts. The signs that you're beginning to work consciously with imagination as creative force rather than just passively experiencing mental imagery include noticing that what you vividly visualize tends to manifest more reliably, that circumstances align in unexpected ways with images you've held clearly, that your body responds to imagined experiences almost as if they were physically real, that you can influence your emotional state through deliberately chosen imagery, that creative solutions to problems arrive as visual insights rather than just logical deductions. You might notice increasing vividness and clarity in your mental imagery, ability to sustain complex visualizations for longer periods, capacity to manipulate and transform images consciously rather than just watching them passively, growing sense that imagination is not just in your head but is interface between your consciousness and larger creative forces operating in cosmos. Now we descend into the specific territory where imagination operates, the realm Steiner called the etheric world, a dimension of reality that interpenetrates physical space but operates at finer frequency, invisible to ordinary sight but perceivable to developed clairvoyant vision, where forms are fluid and responsive to consciousness in ways that solid matter is not, where time operates differently, allowing past, present, and future to intermingle, where the formative forces that shape and sustain all living things have their source in continuing activity. Understanding the etheric body and etheric world is essential for working consciously with imagination because this is the actual medium in which imaginative activity occurs, the substance that responds to your mental images and gives them power to affect physical reality. And without grasping this, you'll either dismiss imagination as mere subjective fantasy, or you'll try to use it through sheer will and affirmation without understanding the actual mechanics of how it works, producing either cynicism or frustration when results don't match expectations. The etheric body, as Steiner described through direct spiritual perception, is not physical organ or system, but is organizing matrix of living forces that builds and maintains physical form, that gives coherent shape to matter that would otherwise just be chemical soup, that sustains life and growth and healing and memory, that withdraws at death, allowing physical body to decompose because organizing forces are no longer present. In living beings, the etheric body extends slightly beyond physical boundaries, creating what some call aura or energy field, and it's constantly active, perpetually working to maintain form against entropy's tendency toward dissolution, repairing damage, replacing cells, storing experiences as living memory distinct from brain-based recall. The etheric is realm of growth and metamorphosis, where seed becomes plant, where tadpole becomes frog, where child becomes adult, all transformations guided by formative imagination held in etheric template that knows the mature form and works to manifest it through time. In plants, the etheric body is most dominant, which is why plants grow in such wildly imaginative forms, why no two trees are exactly alike, even of same species, why growth responds so dramatically to environment, creating infinite variation within species template. In animals, astral body of instinct and emotion begins to influence form, but etheric forces still dominate physical structure, which is why animals grow to species-specific sizes and shapes relatively reliably. In humans, ego or true I can consciously work with etheric forces, can use imagination deliberately to shape etheric body, which then affects physical form, which is why humans are capable of such dramatic self-transformation, why we can develop new capacities, heal ourselves, create our bodies to some degree through conscious intention in ways that animals cannot. The substance of etheric realm is what occult traditions have called astral light or akasha, a living responsive medium that holds forms as images, that records all events like cosmic memory, that responds to consciousness by taking shapes that consciousness impresses upon it. When you imagine vividly, you're literally creating forms in this etheric substance, thought forms that have their own kind of reality and persistence, that can be perceived by those with etheric vision as actual structures hovering in the subtle dimension that influence physical reality through resonance and attraction, drawing circumstances and materials that match the etheric pattern. This is not metaphor or wishful thinking, but is observable spiritual fact that Steiner verified repeatedly through clairvoyant investigation and that other developed seers have confirmed independently. Research on biofields and subtle energy, while controversial in mainstream science, includes studies using specialized photography and measurement devices that detect electromagnetic fields around living beings, showing that these fields respond to consciousness, emotion, and intention, that healers can affect these fields in measurable ways, that plants respond to human intention in ways that cannot be explained by known physical mechanisms. Studies on morphogenetic fields by biologist Rupert Sheldrake propose that organisms are shaped by fields of information that transcend physical DNA, that these fields can be influenced by members of species in different locations, suggesting some non-local organizing principle, which aligns with Steiner's description of etheric formative forces, though Sheldrake doesn't use esoteric terminology. Understanding that imagination operates in etheric realm explains phenomena that materialist framework struggles with. How does placebo work? By creating etheric image of health, that etheric body then works to manifest in physical form. How does visualization improve athletic performance? By creating etheric pattern of successful movement that physical body then more easily follows. How do affirmations sometimes work and sometimes fail? They work when backed by actual etheric imagination, when you see and feel the affirmed reality vividly, creating actual etheric form. They fail when they are just words without living imagination behind them, empty shells that create no real etheric substance. How can prayer or distant healing affect someone? Because consciousness can work directly in etheric realm, which is not bound by physical space, creating healing images that influence recipient's etheric body regardless of physical distance. The quality of your etheric body determines your general vitality, resilience, capacity for growth, and learning and creativity. Someone with strong, healthy etheric body has abundant life force, recovers quickly from illness and stress, thinks in living flexible ways, generates creative ideas easily, maintains youthful qualities longer. Someone with weakened or damaged etheric body is chronically tired, gets sick frequently, thinks rigidly, lacks creativity, ages prematurely. The etheric can be strengthened through proper sleep and nutrition and connection with nature and artistic activity and living imagination, or weakened through overwork and stress and excessive technology, and dead mechanistic thinking and suppression of imagination. Modern industrial culture systematically damages etheric bodies through multiple mechanisms that Steiner warned about over a century ago and which have only intensified. Electromagnetic radiation from technology interferes with etheric forces. Processed foods lack the living etheric vitality of fresh organic produce. Concrete and steel environments deprive us of the etheric nourishment that natural environments provide. Education that emphasizes abstract analytical thinking at expense of artistic imaginative activity atrophies etheric capacities. Entertainment that provides passive stimulation rather than active imagination weakens etheric body's creative function. Understanding this explains the epidemic of exhaustion and chronic illness and lack of meaning that characterizes modern life despite material abundance, because we're starving etherically even while physically overfed. Working consciously with your etheric body through imagination requires specific practices. Spending time in nature, especially near water or in forests, where etheric forces are strong. Engaging arts not as spectator but as creator, painting or sculpting or dancing or singing, activities that engage etheric creativity. Getting adequate sleep during hours when etheric forces are naturally regenerating, roughly 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eating living foods, especially fruits and vegetables grown organically in healthy soil. Practicing eurythmy or similar movement arts that engage etheric body directly. Most importantly, cultivating active imagination rather than passive consumption. Creating your own mental images rather than just receiving pre-made images from screens. Exercising etheric creativity regularly to keep it strong and responsive. Now Steiner makes a crucial distinction that most people miss entirely between two radically different kinds of imagination: dead or fantasy. Imagination that is mere recombination of sensory memories and has no creative power beyond subjective entertainment, and living or creative imagination that connects with actual formative forces and has power to shape reality. Difference between daydreaming that goes nowhere and visioning that manifests outcomes, between fantasy that escapes reality and imagination that creates reality. Understanding this distinction is absolutely essential, because without it, you'll waste time and energy on imaginative activity that produces nothing while wondering why affirmations and visualizations don't work, Or you'll dismiss all imagination as useless fantasy because you've only experienced the dead kind and don't know living imagination exists. Or worse, you'll confuse the two, treating powerful living imagination carelessly as if it were harmless fantasy, unleashing creative forces you cannot control. Dead imagination, what most people experience most of the time, is passive recombination of sensory impressions stored in memory, the mind shuffling and rearranging images from past experience, creating novel combinations, but not truly new forms, producing what Steiner called spectral images that have no real substance in etheric realm, that are just reflections and echoes of physical experiences. When you idly daydream about winning lottery or being famous or taking revenge on someone who wronged you, when you fantasize about idealized romance or adventure, when you worry obsessively replaying possible disasters, all of this is dead imagination, mental activity that may feel vivid but has no creative power, that doesn't actually create anything in subtle realms. That's more like watching a movie in your head than doing real magical work. This kind of imagination can be entertaining or distressing, but it's fundamentally impotent, cannot affect external reality no matter how much time you spend on it, and often serves as escape from reality rather than engagement with it. Living imagination, by contrast, is active creative process that generates truly new forms by connecting with formative forces in etheric and spiritual dimensions, that brings through images from spiritual archetypes rather than just rearranging physical memories, that creates actual substance in etheric realm which then has power to influence physical manifestation. When artist envisions work not yet created and feels it pulling them toward manifestation, when inventor sees solution to problem as complete vision before working out technical details, when healer holds clear image of patient's healthy state, and patient's body responds by moving toward that pattern. When you imagine your future self with such clarity and feeling that your present behavior spontaneously aligns with becoming that person. This is living imagination, creative force in action. Thought that builds reality rather than just reflecting it. The characteristics that distinguish living from dead imagination are specific and recognizable. Living imagination has autonomous quality. Images arise with their own logic and coherence rather than you consciously constructing them. They surprise you, reveal aspects you didn't expect, unfold with sense of discovering something that already exists rather than inventing it. Living imagination produces strong emotional response, not just pleasant feelings, but deep resonance, sense of rightness and truth. Sometimes even overwhelming intensity that dead fantasy never evokes. Living imagination changes you, affects your energy and behavior immediately, creates a sense of possibility and motivation, makes action natural rather than forced. Whereas dead fantasy leaves you unchanged, passive consumer of your own mental entertainment. Living imagination has what Steiner called picture character, rather than just conceptual content, appears as actual images with sensory qualities, visual details, sounds, textures, movement, livingness, rather than as abstract ideas or verbal descriptions. Living imagination engages will, creates impulse toward manifestation, makes you want to do something to bring vision into reality, whereas dead fantasy is satisfied with just imagining, and may even reduce motivation by providing imaginary satisfaction that substitutes for real achievement. Living imagination connects with something larger than personal mind, feels like receiving inspiration rather than just thinking, creates a sense of being channel for forces beyond ego, whereas dead fantasy is clearly just your own mind playing with memories and desires. Research on creative cognition and flow states touches on this distinction without naming it in Steiner's terms. Studies on insight and aha moments show that creative breakthroughs arrive with characteristic suddenness and certainty, feel different from ordinary analytical thinking, engage different neural networks suggesting different cognitive process. Research on inspiration and mystical experience documents states where ideas or visions arrive, with sense of being given rather than constructed, with emotional intensity and conviction of truth, with lasting impact on behavior and values. Studies on effectiveness of visualization distinguish between process visualization, which focuses on specific steps and works reliably, versus outcome visualization, which just imagines end result and often fails, suggesting that quality of imagination matters more than quantity. Developing capacity for living imagination requires specific training that modern education completely neglects or actively suppresses. You must first clear mind of dead thoughts and compulsive mental chatter. Create empty space where new images can arise rather than just endlessly recycling old material. This requires meditation practice, learning to quiet the automatic thinking that fills consciousness with noise. You must develop concentration, ability to hold single image clearly and steadily rather than letting attention fragment and drift. You must cultivate receptivity, learning to allow images to arise rather than forcing them, developing sensitivity to distinguish autonomous living images from ones you're consciously constructing from memory fragments. You must engage artistic practice regularly. Whether professional art or amateur creativity doesn't matter. What matters is the process of bringing inner vision into external form, training the capacity to hold image internally while manifesting it externally, developing the will forces that bridge imagination and physical action. Steiner emphasized that artistic activity is not optional luxury, but is essential training for anyone wanting to develop living imagination, because art is the primary human activity where etheric creativity naturally expresses itself, where formative forces work directly, where imagination proves its reality by creating actual forms in physical world. You must study authentic spiritual imaginations provided by Steiner and other genuine esoteric teachers, images like the rose cross or the seed growing into plant, contemplating them meditatively until they come alive in your consciousness, until they cease being mere symbols and become actual perceptions of spiritual processes. These canonical imaginations are not arbitrary metaphors, but are accurate representations of spiritual realities, and working with them trains your consciousness to perceive in etheric dimensions, develops the organ of living imagination through regular exercise with images that are known to be connected to actual formative forces. You must develop moral foundation, because living imagination connects you with powerful forces that can be used for harm as easily as for good, and without ethical grounding, you're liable to use creative imagination for selfish purposes, creating manifestations that serve ego at expense of others or of larger good, generating karma that will have to be worked through painfully in future lives. Steiner taught that imagination without morality is black magic, creative power divorced from love and wisdom, sorcery rather than white magic, and that the spiritual hierarchies actually prevent development of living imagination in those who lack moral maturity, protecting cosmic order from abuse by limiting imaginative power to those who can be trusted to use it responsibly. The transition from dead to living imagination is a gradual process requiring patience and sustained practice, but you'll know it's happening when images start arriving with autonomous quality, when visualization produces tangible effects in your life, when creative inspiration flows more readily, when your mental imagery becomes more vivid and emotionally impactful, when you can sustain complex visualizations easily, when imagination feels like accessing something real rather than just fantasizing, when the boundary between inner vision and outer reality becomes more permeable, and you recognize that both are aspects of one unified creative process in which you're privileged to participate consciously. Now, Steiner reveals the specific practical methods he used to train students in developing living creative imagination. Techniques that seem simple in description, but prove extraordinarily powerful in sustained practice. Exercises designed not just to make imagination more vivid, but to transform its very nature from dead fantasy to living creative force, to awaken dormant capacities in etheric body, and establish conscious connection with formative forces operating in spiritual dimensions. These methods were guarded as esoteric secrets for centuries before Steiner made them public as part of his mission to bring spiritual knowledge into open availability for all who are ready to work with it seriously. And even now, they remain secret in deeper sense because words describing them cannot convey the actual experience of practicing them. The transformation only occurs through doing the exercises yourself with discipline and dedication that most people are unwilling to maintain. The foundational exercise Steiner prescribed is what he called concentration or thought control, the practice of choosing a simple object and focusing your full attention on it for an extended period, typically starting with 5 minutes and building to 20 or more, visualizing the object in detail without allowing any other thoughts or associations to intrude. The object should be simple and neutral, something like a pencil or a seed or a geometric form, and you examine it mentally from every angle, considering its qualities, its purpose, how it's made, what it represents, staying focused exclusively on this object, returning attention to it whenever mind wanders. This sounds trivial, but is extraordinarily difficult in practice because it confronts directly the automatic associative thinking that normally dominates consciousness, the constant stream of thoughts triggered by other thoughts that you cannot easily interrupt or control. The purpose is not to learn about the object, but to develop muscle of sustained, directed thinking, to strengthen will forces that can hold consciousness where you choose, rather than where it's pulled by association or habit or desire. Research on attention training shows that this capacity for sustained, focused attention is foundational for almost all higher cognitive functions, that it's dramatically lacking in modern populations due to constant digital distraction, that it can be systematically developed through practice, producing measurable changes in brain structure and function. But Steiner's concentration practice goes beyond just attention training to developing what he called living thinking, thought that's active and creative rather than passive and mechanical, that participates with reality rather than just observing it. After mastering basic concentration, you progress to what Steiner called symbolic meditation, working with specific images that represent spiritual processes and realities. He provided numerous canonical imaginations for this work, contemplating a seed and visualizing the plant that will grow from it, seeing how seed must die for plant to emerge, understanding death and resurrection as universal principle, meditating on metamorphosis, watching caterpillar transform through chrysalis into butterfly, seeing how form must completely dissolve before new form can arise, visualizing the rose cross, red roses on black cross, understanding cross as death of lower nature and roses as purified desires blooming from that death, working with color progressively, starting with single color held in consciousness, then letting it transform into complementary color, developing capacity to create and sustain and transform mental images consciously. The key with these meditations is not just visualizing the image, but entering into it imaginatively, allowing it to become alive in consciousness, letting it unfold and reveal itself rather than just holding static picture, developing sense of participating in the process you're imagining rather than just watching it from outside. This transforms passive visualization into active imagination, dead imagery into living formative force. You know the practice is working when images begin to move and develop autonomously, when you experience genuine surprise at what emerges, when the meditation produces strong emotional response or physical sensations, when insights arise that you didn't consciously reason out, when the boundary between you, visualizing, and something being shown to you becomes unclear. Another crucial practice Steiner taught is what he called reverse or backward visualization, reviewing your day backward from evening to morning every night before sleep, seeing events in reverse chronological order, observing yourself as if watching someone else rather than reliving from inside. This serves multiple functions, develops capacity to hold complex sequences independently of how they occurred in time, creates objectivity toward your own experience, processes daily events allowing karma to be worked through more consciously, prepares consciousness for death, which is itself a life review, begins to build continuity between waking and sleeping consciousness. The backward review specifically strengthens etheric body because you're working against natural flow of time, exercising formative forces that normally just follow temporal sequence, developing capacity to reshape experience imaginatively rather than being bound by how it happened physically. Steiner also prescribed what he called supplementary exercises for developing specific aspects of imaginative capacity. The flower exercise. Visualize a flower in bud, watch it slowly open into full bloom, hold it there, then watch it wither and decompose, seeing complete cycle of growth and decay, understanding impermanence and transformation. The fountain exercise. Imagine fountain of water arising from pool, arcing up, falling back down, sustaining this image with steady flow and rhythm, developing capacity for dynamic rather than static imagery. The geometric transformation exercise. Visualize simple geometric form like triangle, then smoothly transform it into square, then circle, then back to triangle, developing fluidity and control in manipulating mental images. The practice of conscious daydreaming or controlled fantasy, where you deliberately create imaginative scenarios but maintain awareness that you're creating them, not getting lost in the fantasy, but consciously directing it, using it as training ground for developing imaginative will. This is different from ordinary daydreaming, where you're a passive spectator of your own mental creations. Here, you're active director, consciously choosing what to imagine, maintaining metacognitive awareness throughout, using fantasy deliberately as exercise rather than as escape. This develops crucial capacity to distinguish between images you're consciously creating and images that arise autonomously from deeper sources. Skill essential for advanced spiritual perception, where you must separate genuine clairvoyant vision from projection and fantasy. The eurythmy and movement practices Steiner developed specifically to engage etheric forces directly through visible movement, creating physical gestures that correspond to sounds and musical tones, translating speech and music into bodily form, which trains imagination by making etheric formative activity visible and conscious. While doing eurythmy, you're simultaneously imagining the forces you're expressing, creating feedback loop between imagination and physical manifestation that strengthens both, developing capacity to perceive etheric movements that normally remain invisible, training the body itself to become instrument of living imagination. The artistic exercises Steiner prescribed, including painting with watercolors in specific ways that develop color sense and experience of color as living force, modeling in clay or wax to develop three-dimensional imagination and tactile sensitivity, creative writing and storytelling to develop narrative imagination and character development, music and singing to develop temporal imagination and capacity to work with rhythm and harmony. All artistic activity engages etheric creativity, but these specific practices are designed to systematically develop different aspects of imaginative capacity, building comprehensive skill in working with living images across all sensory modalities and all dimensions of experience. Essential to all these practices is regularity and sustained commitment. Steiner emphasized that sporadic practice produces nothing, that imagination develops like muscle through daily exercise over months and years, that skipping even one day creates regression requiring extra work to recover ground lost. Most people don't try these exercises briefly, get discouraged when dramatic results don't appear immediately, abandon them before the real work begins, never discovering that genuine capacity only emerges after initial enthusiasm fades, and practice becomes discipline maintained through commitment to path rather than expectation of rewards. The exercises are cumulative, each session building on previous ones, strengthening subtle capacities that remain invisible until they suddenly manifest as qualitative shift in consciousness, like muscle that grows imperceptibly day by day, until suddenly you can lift weight that was previously impossible. Now we enter the deeper esoteric teaching about how imagination actually transforms from mere mental activity into force capable of shaping physical reality, the alchemical process by which images held in consciousness densify through subtle dimensions until manifesting as concrete circumstances and forms, mechanism that operates according to lawful principles as reliable as any physical law once you understand them and learn to work with them consciously. Steiner called this process the descent of imagination from spiritual through etheric to physical, describing precise stages through which mental images must pass to become materially real, each stage requiring specific conditions and efforts, understanding of which allows you to participate consciously in manifestation rather than just hoping vaguely that visualization will somehow magically produce results without knowing why or how it should work. The process begins in what Steiner called the realm of pure spirit, or devachan, the dimension where archetypal ideas exist as living beings, where divine imaginations that will eventually manifest as physical creation first arise in the consciousness of spiritual hierarchies, where your own highest inspirations originate when you're receptive to spiritual influence, where truly new creative visions are born not from rearranging existing elements, but from touching the source of cosmic creativity itself. Not all imagination reaches this level. Most mental imagery originates in lower dimensions, just rearranging physical memories, but when you have genuine inspiration that feels like revelation rather than invention, like discovering something that already exists rather than making it up, you're briefly touching this realm of spiritual archetypes, where the gods themselves imagine reality into being. From spiritual realm, imagination descends into what Steiner called the astral dimension, the realm of desire and emotion and thought, where archetypal ideas take on more specific form, where they clothe themselves in feeling and begin to attract the specific qualities they'll need for manifestation, where they start to gather astral substance that gives them character and energy. At this stage, imagination must be infused with emotion to progress further. Purely cold intellectual concepts remain stuck in mental dimension without power to descend into manifestation, which is why affirmations spoken without feeling don't work, why visualization that engages your emotions is vastly more powerful than visualization that's just mechanical mental exercise. The emotion provides fuel, gives imagination the dynamic charge that pulls it downward toward density, that attracts astral substance, which begins building body for the image. From astral, imagination descends into etheric dimension, the realm of formative forces and life energy, where it begins to take on the specific patterns and structures through which it will organize physical matter, where the living template is created that will guide physical manifestation. This is a crucial stage that most visualization teaching completely ignores. Between feeling the desire and seeing physical result, there must be formation of etheric pattern, creation of energetic blueprint that physical matter will follow, and this requires sustained focused imagination over time, not just occasional visualization, but regular returning to the image, maintaining it clearly, adding more detail, feeling it more completely, allowing it to take on life and substance in etheric realm, where it becomes almost but not quite physical, where someone with etheric vision could actually perceive the form you're creating, even though it's not yet materially manifest. Finally, if all conditions are right, the etheric pattern densifies into physical manifestation, attracting actual matter that arranges itself according to the blueprint you've created, producing the tangible result in external reality. But this final step is not automatic and not guaranteed. Many factors can prevent full physical manifestation even when etheric pattern is well formed. Physical laws and existing circumstances must allow the manifestation. You cannot imagine yourself to fly by flapping your arms, no matter how powerful your imagination, because physical laws don't permit it. Available resources and energies must be sufficient. If you're imagining an outcome that requires resources you cannot access, it won't fully manifest regardless of imagination strength. Karmic conditions must permit it. If what you're imagining violates your soul's intended development or interferes with others' free will, spiritual hierarchies will block it from manifesting even if etheric pattern is perfect. Understanding this process explains why visualization sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, why results are sometimes partial or delayed or manifested in unexpected ways. If you're only working with mental images without engaging emotion, imagination never descends past astral into etheric, remains just thought without formative power. If you visualize occasionally without sustained practice, you create weak etheric pattern that dissolves before densifying into physical form, like seed that sprouts but dies before growing into mature plant. If you're imagining something that violates physical laws or karmic conditions, no amount of visualization will produce it. You're trying to create something that cannot exist, given the actual constraints of reality. The alchemical work of transforming thought into reality requires understanding and cooperating with these principles. First, ensure your imagination originates from genuine inspiration rather than just ego desire, connecting it to spiritual source that gives it real power rather than just personal wanting that has no force beyond your small will. This means learning to distinguish between visions that arise from your highest self or from spiritual guidance versus fantasies generated by unexamined desires and fears. Second, infuse imagination with genuine emotion, not manufactured feeling, but real heartfelt connection to what you're visualizing. Letting yourself feel what it would be like if vision were already manifest, generating the astral charge that pulls image toward manifestation. Third, practice sustained, focused visualization regularly, daily if possible, building etheric pattern through repetition and attention, adding detail and clarity each time you return to the image, strengthening the formative forces until etheric template becomes stable and powerful enough to attract physical matter. Fourth, align your physical actions with your imagination, using the image to guide choices and behaviors, creating congruence between inner vision and outer activity. Because manifestation requires you to meet the descending imagination with ascending action, cooperating consciously with the process rather than expecting results to appear through imagination alone while your actual behavior contradicts what you're visualizing. Fifth, maintain patience and faith through the interval between creating etheric pattern and seeing physical result, understanding that there's necessary time lag, that seeds don't become trees overnight, that forcing or doubting interrupts the natural process of densification. That manifestation has its own timing that you cannot control through will. Sixth, remain open to how manifestation occurs, recognizing that the form might differ from exactly what you imagined while still fulfilling the essence of your vision, that spiritual intelligence guiding manifestation knows better than your conscious mind what form will actually serve your highest good, that sometimes non-manifestation or alternative manifestation is the real answer to your imaginative work. Research on goal setting and achievement, particularly work on implementation intentions and mental contrasting, provides some scientific support for these principles, though without the esoteric framework. Studies show that combining vivid visualization of desired outcome with realistic assessment of obstacles and specific planning for overcoming them produces better results than visualization alone. That fantasizing without action can actually reduce motivation. That sustained commitment and flexible adaptation are more important than initial enthusiasm. All of which aligns with Steiner's teaching about the sustained work required to bring imagination through etheric into physical manifestation. The ultimate teaching is that you're already creating your reality through imagination, whether you're conscious of it or not. That every thought and image you hold regularly is working to manifest, that the life you're living now is largely the result of what you imagined consciously or unconsciously in the past, and that taking conscious control of this process through trained imagination transforms you from passive victim of circumstances to active creator of destiny, from someone reality happens to into someone who happens to reality, from unconscious participant in creation to conscious co-creator, working intentionally with forces that are always already shaping your experience and your world. Now, we must look unflinchingly at the shadow side of imagination's creative power, because every force that can create can also destroy. Every capacity that can heal can also harm. An imagination without conscious direction and moral foundation is a dangerous weapon turned against yourself and potentially against others, creating precisely what you fear, manifesting exactly what you don't want, building prisons rather than palaces, summoning demons rather than angels. Steiner warned extensively about these dangers, emphasizing that developing powerful imagination without developing self-knowledge and ethical clarity is recipe for disaster, that the same force that could create paradise can create hell, that imagination in service of unconscious drives and neurotic patterns and selfish desires produces manifestations that damage rather than develop, that karmic consequences of misusing creative imagination are severe precisely because you're wielding real power, not just having harmless private thoughts. The first and most common danger is unconscious negative imagination. The constant stream of worry and catastrophizing and fearful visualization that most people indulge without recognizing they're actively creating what they're imagining, attracting the very outcomes they're trying to avoid through giving them imaginative energy and emotional charge. Every time you vividly imagine worst-case scenario, every time you replay possible disasters in detail, every time you visualize yourself failing or being rejected or getting hurt, you're not just passively worrying, you're actively building etheric patterns that then work to manifest physically, creating self-fulfilling prophecies, attracting circumstances that match your fearful imagery, weakening your actual capacity to handle challenges because you've already rehearsed failure so thoroughly. In imagination, that success becomes almost impossible. Research on anxiety and cognitive behavioral therapy has documented this pattern extensively, showing that anxious people engage in detailed mental rehearsal of threatening scenarios, that this catastrophic thinking actually increases likelihood of negative outcomes through multiple mechanisms, including physiological stress response, behavioral avoidance, selective attention to threat-consistent information. Studies on the nocebo effect show that negative expectations produce measurable harmful physiological effects, the dark mirror of placebo, proving that imagination of harm creates actual damage even without physical cause. But mainstream psychology treats this as purely psychological phenomenon without recognizing the metaphysical dimension that Steiner saw. That fearful imagination is creating actual forms in etheric dimension that then work to manifest the feared outcome. The second danger is what Steiner called wish fulfillment or desire imagination, using creative power to manifest ego desires without considering larger consequences, imagining outcomes that would satisfy your immediate wants without seeing how they might harm your long-term development or affect others negatively, creating situations that seem good in fantasy but prove destructive in reality. The classic tale of careful what you wish for is not just moral fable, but is accurate description of what happens when imagination manifests desires without wisdom guiding them. You imagine wealth and receive it, but lose relationships in process. You imagine fame and achieve it, but discover it brings suffering you didn't anticipate. You imagine perfect partner and attract someone who matches your fantasy, but the relationship proves toxic because fantasy was based on projection rather than reality. Steiner taught that desire-based imagination is a form of black magic, even when intentions aren't consciously malicious, because it's using spiritual forces for personal gain without considering impact on collective good or cosmic evolution, placing ego's wants above soul's needs, manifesting lower rather than higher possibilities. The karma for this is proportional to your power. Weak, undeveloped imagination producing desire-based manifestations creates relatively minor karma, because effects are limited, but strong trained imagination used for purely selfish purposes creates severe karma because you're wielding real power for wrong purposes, manipulating spiritual forces that should be serving evolution to instead serve ego, creating distortions in fabric of reality that must eventually be corrected through suffering. That teaches you the consequences of your misuse. The third danger is imagination that violates others' free will, attempting to use creative visualization to control or manipulate people. Imagining specific individuals behaving in ways you want them to behave, trying to force particular outcomes in relationships or situations where others have their own will and destiny. This is psychic coercion, magical assault, violation of cosmic law that protects individual freedom, and it creates severe negative karma regardless of whether you believe your intentions are good, whether you think you're helping the other person or trying to create mutually beneficial outcome. Using imagination to try to make someone love you, to convince someone to hire you, to influence someone's choices in directions you prefer, all of this is black magic, interference with another soul's path, and spiritual hierarchies will eventually block such efforts while ensuring karmic consequences for attempting them. The fourth danger is what Steiner called ahrimanic imagination, mechanical dead materialist, thinking that denies spiritual dimension and reduces reality to physical processes only, imagination that can only recombine existing material forms without touching living creative sources, that builds increasingly complex technological and social machinery, but without soul or meaning or connection to human needs, that creates dystopian futures of control and mechanization and death of spirit. This is slower, more insidious danger than dramatic magical misuse. It's the collective imagination of materialist culture creating a world where technology dominates nature, where efficiency replaces meaning, where humans become cogs and machines, where life itself is reduced to mechanisms and processes stripped of sacred dimension. The fifth danger is luciferic imagination, fantasies of spiritual attainment and specialness that inflate ego rather than dissolving it, imagining yourself as enlightened master or chosen messenger or specially evolved soul, creating spiritual personas that are just ego in religious clothing, using imagination to escape reality rather than to create positively in it. This produces the spiritual narcissist who talks about unity consciousness while treating others as inferior, who claims to channel divine messages that always confirm their existing beliefs, who uses spiritual concepts to avoid facing psychological wounds and character defects. Steiner warned this is particularly common among those who develop some genuine spiritual capacity but lack moral foundation to use it wisely, who claim the light while refusing to face their shadow. The sixth danger is collective possession by destructive imaginations, where entire groups or cultures get captured by toxic visions that then work to manifest on large scale, creating wars, genocides, environmental destruction, social collapse, precisely because imagination at collective level has even more power than individual imagination, can reshape entire civilization for good or ill depending on what images dominate collective consciousness. The Nazi imagination of racial purity and national supremacy manifested as Holocaust. The American imagination of manifest destiny and unlimited growth manifested as genocide and ecological crisis. The contemporary collective imagination of technology, solving all problems while ignoring spiritual dimension, is manifesting as meaning crisis and social fragmentation even amid material abundance. Protecting yourself and others from these dangers requires rigorous self-examination, moral development, and conscious direction of imaginative activity. First, monitor your imagination constantly. Notice what you're regularly visualizing and whether it's constructive or destructive, positive or negative, selfish or serving larger good. Second, cultivate imagination of highest outcomes aligned with your soul's purpose and collective evolution, rather than just ego's desires. Asking, what does my highest self want to create, rather than what does my current mood or fear want? Third, maintain ethical boundaries about never using imagination to control or manipulate others, respecting free will absolutely, limiting your creative work to yourself and circumstances you can legitimately influence. Fourth, balance imagination with grounding in physical reality, ensuring you're not escaping into fantasy but using imagination to engage more effectively with actual conditions and challenges. Fifth, seek feedback from trusted others and from results themselves, noticing whether your imaginative work is producing positive outcomes or creating problems, being willing to correct course when imagination proves misguided. Sixth, practice shadow work and psychological healing to ensure imagination isn't being hijacked by unconscious complexes and unresolved wounds, that visions are arising from conscious, integrated self rather than from fragmented, traumatized aspects operating beneath awareness. Ultimately, the teaching is that imagination is power, real magical power, creative force that shapes reality. And like all power, it must be wielded with wisdom and restraint and accountability, or it becomes destructive. The solution is not to suppress imagination, but to develop it consciously, while simultaneously developing the moral foundation and self-knowledge that allow it to be used rightly, transforming yourself into a trustworthy vessel for creative forces rather than dangerous child playing with matches unaware of fire's power to consume. Now, Steiner reveals one of imagination's most immediately practical applications, its power to heal physical illness and psychological suffering through creating new etheric patterns that reorganize diseased or damaged forms back toward health, principle that underlies all genuine healing, whether through placebo effect or visualization or prayer or laying on of hands or any therapeutic approach that works with consciousness rather than just manipulating matter. Understanding how imagination heals allows you to participate consciously in your own healing and potentially to help heal others, transforming from passive patient, waiting for external intervention, to active participant creating conditions for body's own remarkable self-healing capacities to operate optimally. From someone disease happens to into someone who happens to disease, changing relationship with illness from victim stance to creative engagement. The fundamental principle is that physical body is maintained and organized by etheric body, the formative force matrix that continuously works to sustain health, repair damage, resist disease, fight infection, all the miraculous self-healing activities that happen automatically without conscious direction. When etheric body is strong and clear, physical health tends to be good, even in presence of pathogens or stressors, because etheric forces can reorganize physical matter effectively. When etheric body is weakened or distorted, illness develops even without external causes. Because formative forces cannot maintain healthy organization, cells divide chaotically, creating tumors, immune system attacks, self-creating autoimmune disease, organs malfunction without clear physical etiology. Most chronic illness, Steiner observed, has etheric root, even when physical symptoms are real and measurable, represents distortion in formative patterns that then manifest as physical pathology. Imagination heals by creating healthy, etheric patterns that etheric body then works to manifest physically, giving it template to follow, strengthening the formative image of health that disease has obscured or weakened. When you vividly imagine yourself healthy, seeing body functioning optimally, feeling energy flowing freely, visualizing specific organs working perfectly, you're not just engaging in wishful thinking, but are actually building etheric structure that supports physical healing, creating the pattern. Physical matter will naturally move toward following if conditions allow. This is why placebo works with measurable physiological effects. Not because people are fooling themselves, but because belief in healing creates actual etheric pattern of health that body then manifests. Imagination literally creating the biological reality of recovery. Research on guided imagery and visualization in medical settings has documented significant effects on healing outcomes, though without understanding the etheric mechanisms Steiner described. Studies show that cancer patients who practice visualization of immune cells destroying cancer cells alongside conventional treatment show better outcomes than those who receive only medical intervention. Research on surgical recovery shows that patients who visualize healing process before and after surgery require less pain medication and heal faster. Studies on chronic pain demonstrate that imagining pain relief, or imagining the affected area as healthy and comfortable, produces measurable reduction in pain perception and sometimes actual physiological healing. This isn't placebo in dismissive sense, but is imagination operating as genuine healing force. Steiner provided specific imaginations designed for healing different types of conditions. For inflammatory conditions, imagine cool blue healing light flowing into affected area, soothing and calming the inflammation, seeing tissues returning to normal healthy state, feeling the heat dissipating. For weakened organs, visualize the organ bathed in golden vitalizing light, see it growing stronger and more functional. Imagine it performing its tasks easily and perfectly. For psychological suffering, create images of your highest self or of divine presence surrounding and supporting you. Feel yourself being held by forces larger than your pain. See yourself moving through suffering into greater wholeness and wisdom. For systemic illness, imagine entire body filled with healing light. See all systems working in harmony. Feel vibrant health radiating from every cell. The key is specificity combined with feeling. Vague, generic visualization of being healthy has limited power because it's not creating clear etheric pattern. Detailed imagery of specific organs and processes functioning optimally creates precise template for healing, but imagery without emotion remains merely mental. Healing imagination must engage your feelings, must make you actually feel healthy and whole while visualizing, must generate the emotional and energetic state of wellness, not just the mental picture. This combination of precise imagery and genuine feeling creates etheric substance that has real formative power, gives etheric body the pattern and energy to reorganize physical matter toward health. Important to understand that imagination is not substitute for necessary medical intervention or lifestyle changes, but is complement that works with them, enhancing body's own healing while you also use appropriate physical means. Steiner was not opposed to conventional medicine where it's genuinely needed, but he recognized its limitations, that it treats symptoms and physical mechanisms without addressing etheric and spiritual roots of disease, that purely material interventions often suppress symptoms without creating actual healing. Combining medical treatment with conscious imaginative work addresses illness on multiple levels. Physical intervention deals with immediate pathology, while imagination creates conditions for genuine healing at formative level, preventing recurrence and supporting long-term wellness. The practice requires discipline and sustained effort. Occasional visualization, while continuing harmful habits and stress patterns, won't produce healing any more than occasionally eating healthy, while generally consuming junk food would create health. You must practice healing imagery daily, ideally multiple times daily, building strong, consistent etheric pattern. You must also address lifestyle and psychological factors contributing to illness, using imagination not as magical bypass, but as support for comprehensive healing approach. You must maintain emotional equanimity about outcome, neither attached to desperate need for healing, which creates tension that blocks the process, nor skeptical that it won't work, which undermines the imaginative creation, but finding middle ground of hopeful, engaged practice without attachment to specific timeline or form of healing. For healing others, ethical considerations become crucial. You can practice healing visualization for others with their knowledge and consent, creating imaginations of their healing that support their own recovery process. But attempting to heal someone without their knowledge or against their will is violation of their free will, is magical interference regardless of good intentions. And while it might occasionally produce physical effects, it creates karmic complications and undermines the person's own relationship to their illness and healing journey. Steiner taught that illness often serves soul's developmental needs, teaches necessary lessons, forces confrontation with avoided issues, and removing it through magical means without the person doing the inner work can actually harm their spiritual development even while providing physical relief. The ultimate teaching is that healing is return to wholeness, reunion with your true nature, which is inherently healthy and vital, And imagination facilitates this return by creating clear vision of what you actually are beneath the distortions of disease, helping you remember and reconnect with the perfect template held in your spiritual essence, allowing that template to work through etheric body to reorganize physical matter into its rightful, healthy form. This understanding transforms illness from enemy to be defeated into teacher, pointing toward places where you've lost connection with your true self, and healing imagination becomes not just technique for eliminating symptoms, but practice for remembering and manifesting your essential wholeness at every level of being. Now Steiner directs our attention to perhaps the most profound demonstration of imagination's natural power. The young child, whose entire development from helpless infant to walking, talking, thinking being occurs primarily through imaginative activity, through play and imitation and fantasy that are not just entertainment but are actual formative work, through which child literally creates their own brain structure, physical coordination, language capacity, social understanding, all emerging. From living imagination that adults have tragically lost in process of so-called maturation, that is actually loss of essential human capacities, dulling of creative forces, death of the very faculties that made consciousness possible. Understanding what children still possess naturally reveals what adults must consciously reclaim through spiritual training, shows that imagination is not advanced esoteric technique, but is recovery of original human endowment that modern education and culture systematically destroy, return to capacities we all once had, but were trained to abandon. In early childhood from birth to roughly age 7, Steiner observed, the child lives almost entirely in etheric realm, in world of imagination and living forces, perceiving reality in ways completely different from adult consciousness. Physical objects are not yet dead matter, but are living beings with character and soul. Furniture can be friends or monsters, clouds or real creatures. The boundary between real and imaginary is fluid and permeable. Because for child, everything is real, everything is alive. Consciousness has not yet hardened into materialist perception that separates subject from object, inner from outer, real from imagined. The child's play is not mere amusement, but is serious work of building nervous system, developing motor coordination, learning social behavior, processing experiences, creating the very structures of consciousness through imaginative activity that adults mistake for make-believe, but which is actually reality creation happening before their eyes. Watch young child at play and you're witnessing imagination in its purest, most powerful form, uncontaminated by the doubt and rationalization and separation that cripple adult imagination. Child picks up stick and it becomes sword, becomes horse, becomes magic wand. Not through pretense, but through actual transformation. In child's imaginative perception, object literally is what imagination makes it. Child creates elaborate worlds with simple props, entire narratives and scenarios unfold. And in these imaginal worlds, child is developing language, learning causality, experimenting with roles and relationships, building the cognitive and emotional structures that will serve them throughout life, doing through play, what formal education later tries to do through instruction, but with fraction of the effectiveness. Because play engages living imagination, while instruction addresses only dead intellect. Steiner emphasized that this imaginative play is how etheric body builds the physical brain and nervous system, that the formative forces active in childhood are literally sculpting neural tissue, that every imaginative activity creates corresponding neurological structure, that repetitive imaginative play establishes patterns that become automatic physical capacities. The child who plays with blocks is building spatial reasoning centers. The child who engages in pretend social scenarios is developing theory of mind and emotional intelligence. The child who tells stories is establishing language and narrative comprehension. All of this happens not through direct instruction, but through imagination working formatively from within, creating from inside out rather than being imposed from outside in. Research on child development and neuroplasticity supports Steiner's observations, though typically without recognizing the etheric mechanisms. Studies show that play is essential for healthy development, that children who engage in rich imaginative play show better cognitive, social, and emotional outcomes than those whose play is limited or overly structured. Research on brain development demonstrates that childhood is a period of extraordinary neuroplasticity that experiences literally shape brain structure, creating neural pathways that persist throughout life. Studies on the impact of screen time and digital devices on young children show concerning effects on attention, language development, social skills, suggesting that replacing imaginative play with passive screen consumption damages formative processes that Steiner described. The tragedy Steiner identified is that modern education systematically destroys this natural imaginative capacity, replaces living creative play with dead abstract instruction, forces children into early intellectual activity before formative work is complete, trains them to separate real from imagined and privilege real, teaches them to doubt and analyze and rationalize, rather than to imagine and create and transform. By age 7 or 8, most children have already begun losing the natural clairvoyance and imaginative power they possessed naturally, have learned to perceive as adults do, seeing physical objects as dead matter, dismissing imagination as just pretend, restricting creative activity to designated art times, while spending most energy on accumulating facts and following procedures. The genius, Steiner observed, is the adult who somehow maintains childlike imagination despite cultural conditioning that destroys it in most people, who can still perceive with fresh creative vision, who can see possibilities where others see only fixed reality, who creates new forms rather than just rearranging existing elements. Every transformative artist, every revolutionary inventor, every visionary thinker demonstrates this childlike quality, this refusal to accept consensus reality as final, this capacity to imagine differently and then manifest the imagination. Einstein's thought experiments, imagining riding on light beam or falling an elevator, were not abstract calculations, but were actual imaginative experiences through which he perceived relativistic effects. Tesla visualized complete machines in detail before building them. Blake saw angels and trees and visions of eternity. What distinguishes genius is not higher intelligence in analytical sense, but is access to living imagination that creates new realities rather than just analyzing existing ones. Capacity to think visually and imaginatively rather than only verbally and logically, willingness to trust imagination and follow where it leads rather than remaining confined to what others have already discovered and established. This capacity is not rare genetic gift, but is actually the natural human endowment that most people lose through miseducation and cultural conditioning, which means it can be recovered through conscious practice, through deliberately cultivating the imaginative faculties that were trained out of you, through learning to see and think and create as the child and the genius do, playfully yet seriously, imaginatively yet effectively, combining wonder with wisdom. The protocol for recovering childlike imagination includes regular engagement with arts not as spectator but as creator, allowing yourself to paint or sculpt or write or dance without concern for product quality, reclaiming play as legitimate adult activity rather than guilty indulgence. Spending time in nature which stimulates imagination in ways that built environments cannot, perceiving living forces and beings rather than just material processes. Working with children and learning from their natural imaginative capacity rather than trying to make them prematurely adult. Doing Steiner's imagination exercises, which systematically rebuild what education destroyed. Most importantly, giving yourself permission to imagine freely again, to see things that aren't there, to transform reality through creative vision, to play seriously, recovering the gift you had before they taught you it was useless or dangerous or immature, remembering that imagination is not opposite of reality, but is how reality actually gets created, and that reclaiming it means reclaiming your own creative power, your capacity to participate consciously in the ongoing creation of yourself and your world. Now we arrive at perhaps Steiner's most profound and unique contribution to understanding imagination. The concept of moral imagination, or what he called moral intuition, the capacity to perceive directly through imaginative vision what is ethically right in each unique situation, not by following abstract rules or calculating consequences, but by actually seeing into spiritual dimensions of action and its effects, envisioning outcomes and their full human and cosmic implications, creating mental images of possible futures, and discerning which align with evolution's rightful direction, which serve genuine good rather than just ego preference or cultural conditioning. This is imagination applied not to personal manifestation or artistic creation, but to the fundamental question of how to live rightly, how to act ethically, how to serve collective good, and it represents transformation of moral life from external obedience or social conformity to autonomous ethical creativity, from following commandments to generating right action from direct spiritual perception of what each moment requires. Traditional morality operates through rules. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, prescriptions and prohibitions that tell you what to do or not do regardless of context or individual circumstances. External authority imposing standards that you must follow whether or not you understand their basis or agree with their application. This was a necessary stage in moral development, Steiner taught, creating social order and providing guidance when most humans lacked capacity for autonomous ethical judgment. But it's inadequate for modern consciousness and future evolution, which require individuals capable of perceiving directly what's right, rather than just obeying commands, generating ethical action from creative imagination, rather than from obedience to predetermined codes. Moral imagination begins with capacity to envision consequences of your actions, not just for yourself, but for all affected. To imagine yourself into others' experience, to feel what they would feel, to understand from inside how your choices impact their lives and development. This is different from abstract ethical reasoning that calculates costs and benefits. It's actual imaginative identification with others' subjectivity, developing so strong that you literally cannot comfortably do things that would harm them because you feel their pain as your own through imaginative empathy. Research on empathy and moral development supports this, showing that people high in imaginative perspective-taking capacity demonstrate more prosocial behavior and ethical decision-making than those who rely primarily on abstract moral reasoning. But Steiner's teaching goes beyond psychological empathy to perceiving spiritual dimensions of action, seeing karmic consequences that extend beyond immediate effects into future lives, recognizing that every action creates ripples in spiritual as well as physical dimensions, that what you do now shapes not just present circumstances, but future incarnational conditions for yourself and others. Moral imagination allows you to perceive these subtle effects, to see in imaginative vision how specific action would play out across time and dimensions, giving you information that ethical reasoning alone could never access, allowing you to choose actions that serve genuine spiritual good, even when they might not seem optimal by ordinary material calculation. The practice of moral imagination involves specific exercises. Before making a significant decision or taking action that affects others, pause and engage imaginative exploration of possible futures. Vividly envision yourself taking each possible action. See it unfolding in detail. Imagine consequences not just for yourself, but for everyone involved. Feel into different scenarios, allowing your intuition to sense which align with deeper truth and which feel wrong, despite perhaps being personally advantageous. This is not just intellectual weighing of pros and cons, but is actual imaginative engagement with possible futures, allowing them to reveal themselves, sensing which futures have quality of rightness, which feel aligned with evolution and genuine good, versus which feel distorted even if superficially attractive. Develop capacity to imagine yourself into other people's perspective so completely that you temporarily experience reality from their vantage point, feel their feelings, understand their reasoning, see their needs and fears and hopes as if they were your own. This doesn't mean agreeing with them or condoning harmful behavior, but means developing imagination strong enough to actually inhabit another subjectivity, to know from inside what it's like to be them, which creates natural ethical guidance, because you cannot harm someone whose experience you're truly imagining yourself into, cannot dismiss their legitimate needs, cannot treat them merely as means to your ends. Create regular practice of envisioning highest possible future for yourself and for collective, imagining human society evolve to express love and wisdom and freedom, envisioning culture organized around spiritual development rather than material consumption, seeing technology serving human flourishing rather than controlling it, holding vision of healed planet and conscious humanity. This is not escapist fantasy, but is active creation of etheric template that then draws future toward this possibility that influences your choices in directions that manifest the vision, that adds your imaginative contribution to collective manifestation of genuinely good future versus dystopian futures that too many imagine and thereby help create. Research on moral development, particularly work by Lawrence Kohlberg on stages of moral reasoning, recognizes that highest stage involves autonomous, principled morality operating from universal ethical principles, rather than from rules or social conventions, but this still remains abstract and cognitive. Steiner's moral imagination includes this, but adds the imaginative and intuitive dimension, actually perceiving spiritual realities and allowing that perception to guide action, operating from living vision rather than from dead principles, creating ethical responses unique to each situation rather than applying predetermined rules. The ultimate teaching is that morality must become creative rather than obedient, that future evolution requires humans capable of generating right action from their own spiritual perception and imaginative vision, rather than just following external codes, that this capacity develops through systematic training of imagination specifically directed toward ethical questions, and that moral imagination is not just personal capacity, but is essential for collective survival, because the challenges humanity faces require creative solutions that no predetermined moral code can provide, require ability to envision genuinely new possibilities, and to recognize which align with cosmic good versus which serve only narrow interests or short-term gains. We arrive now at the ultimate teaching about imagination's role in human evolution and cosmic creation, the recognition that will either inspire or terrify depending on your readiness, that humanity's future is not predetermined or imposed by external forces, but is being created right now through collective imagination, that what humans imagine collectively about their own nature and potential and destiny literally manifests as the reality future generations will inhabit, that we are creating. Tomorrow, through what we envision today, that responsibility for where human evolution leads rests with us, with what we choose to imagine and manifest, rather than with fate or deity or unconscious historical forces. Steiner's teaching here is both empowering and sobering. Empowering because it means we're not helpless victims, but active creators. Sobering because it means catastrophe or flourishing. Both depend on quality of our collective imagination and our willingness to manifest what we envision. The mechanism operates at species level, similar to how individual imagination creates personal reality, but with vastly greater power and complexity. Dominant images and narratives circulating in collective consciousness. Stories, cultures tell about who humans are and what life means and where we're heading. These are not just entertainment or philosophy, but are actual creative forces shaping physical and social reality, creating etheric templates that then manifest as material conditions, institutions, technologies, patterns of relationship and organization. When medieval imagination was dominated by religious imagery of God and devil, heaven and hell, salvation and damnation, this created actual lived reality organized around these images, produced Gothic cathedrals and crusades and inquisitions and mystical experiences, manifested the imagined spiritual cosmos as tangible historical reality. When Enlightenment imagination shifted to mechanistic images of clockwork universe and rational man and progress through science, this produced industrial revolution and democratic institutions and scientific method, manifested completely different reality from medieval world because collective imagination had fundamentally transformed. When contemporary imagination is dominated by technological imagery of humans as information processors and reality as computable system and future as determined by artificial intelligence and genetic engineering, this creates the actual reality of digital culture, and biotech and transhumanism manifests the imagined future as present conditions. Steiner observed that spiritual hierarchies guiding human evolution present archetypal imaginations, divine ideas about what humanity could become, possibilities for development that serve cosmic evolution, but these remain merely potential until humans take them up and work to manifest them through conscious, imaginative activity and physical effort. The future is not single predetermined track, but is field of possibilities, multiple potential timelines that could manifest depending on what humans collectively choose to imagine and work toward. Some possibilities align with rightful evolution, serve development of consciousness, and freedom and love lead toward genuine spiritual maturity. Other possibilities represent deviation or regression, serve materialistic goals that undermine spiritual development, lead toward dystopian futures of control and mechanization and loss of humanity's essential nature. The battle for humanity's future is fundamentally a battle of imaginations, conflict between different visions of what humans are and should become, between spiritual imagination that recognizes humans as divine beings evolving toward conscious participation in cosmic creation, versus materialist imagination that reduces humans to biological machines or economic units or computational systems. This battle is not just philosophical, but has actual physical consequences, because whichever imagination dominates collective consciousness will manifest as actual social reality, will shape institutions and technologies and cultural patterns accordingly, will create lived conditions that either support or suppress spiritual development. Research on self-fulfilling prophecies and Pygmalion effects demonstrates at small scale what Steiner described at civilizational scale, that beliefs and expectations create realities matching them, that teachers who imagine students as capable produce better outcomes than those who imagine them as limited, that societies that imagine their members as creative and trustworthy develop differently than those that imagine them as dangerous and incompetent. Studies on technological and social change show that futures that get systematically envisioned and worked toward tend to manifest, that science fiction and speculative scenarios influence actual development trajectories, that collectively imagined futures shape present choices that then create conditions for those futures to materialize. The contemporary crisis is crisis of imagination. Dominant cultural imaginations are either dystopian, envisioning catastrophic futures of environmental collapse and social disintegration, or are transhuman, imagining futures where technology transcends biological humanity, creating post-human condition. Both are materialist imaginations that deny spiritual dimension and therefore create realities devoid of meaning and soul, one through destruction, the other through transformation into machine. Absent from mainstream discourse is spiritual imagination that recognizes possibility of genuine evolution, where humans develop consciousness capacities that make technology servant rather than master, where material development supports rather than replaces spiritual development, where future includes healing of planet and conscious participation in cosmic evolution. The protocol for contributing to positive collective future through imagination involves both individual and collective action. Individually, maintain disciplined practice of envisioning highest possibilities for yourself and for humanity. regularly visualizing futures where spirit and matter are harmonized, where technology serves human flourishing, where consciousness evolution guides material development, where culture supports spiritual awakening. Create art and tell stories and share visions that express this imagination, adding your creative contribution to collective field of possibility. Make life choices and support institutions and practices that align with this vision, manifesting imaginative possibility through actual behavior and participation. Collectively, work to establish communities and movements and institutions dedicated to spiritual imagination and its manifestation, creating cultural islands where alternative imagination can be protected and developed, where people can experience directly that spiritual possibilities are real and viable, where the envisioned future can be partially manifested in present, creating models and templates for wider adoption. Support education in arts and spiritual practices that develop human imagination rather than suppress it, that teach people to envision creatively rather than just consume passively, that empower active creation of desired futures rather than passive acceptance of imposed ones. The ultimate recognition is that we're at a critical juncture where imaginative choices made now will shape humanity's path for centuries or millennia, where deviation toward purely material development could foreclose spiritual possibilities for vast stretches of time, where maintaining and manifesting spiritual imagination could open futures of consciousness, evolution beyond what we can currently conceive. Steiner's teaching is both warning and invitation. Warning that unconscious or materialist imagination creates devastating futures. Invitation to claim our power as conscious co-creators, to participate deliberately in manifesting possibilities that serve genuine good, to use imagination not just for personal benefit, but for collective evolution, creating through our envisioned and manifested choices the reality that future generations will inherit, the world we're literally imagining into. Being through every thought and image and vision we entertain, making us responsible beyond measure for what we choose to imagine, what we commit to manifesting, knowing that imagination is not just private mental activity, but is actual creative force shaping the destiny of our species and our planet, and ultimately contributing to the ongoing evolution of cosmos itself.